So we often hear that students only remember about 10% of what they hear in a training. Now the first question that comes to mind is that because students are really that bad, they can't remember more than 10%? Or is it because we're bad on the teaching side and we overwhelm them with information that is 90% irrelevant? Well, let's look at an example. Take HACCP. Not everyone who works in food manufacturing needs to know everything about HACCP. So let's say this here is the content of a typical HACCP training, everything we normally talk about. And let's say these are the people who show up for that course. Not everyone needs to know all of it. 10% could be all that's relevant to some of them. For example, teams working in a low-risk plant with a simple process with no critical control point, well, they need to understand their HACCP plan, they need to be able to review that plan once a year, and they need to be able to provide feedback. The point is, they don't need to know much about critical control points or how HACCP applies to a high-risk situation. Now, a team working with products that require critical controls, like a medium or a high-risk plant, they need to understand all these things, plus they need to understand all the details about CCPs, how to decide what's a CCP, how to monitor their CCPs, how to validate them, and so on. They need to understand the theory, and they need to be able to apply that theory to their own process. Now, however, there are many things that these first two groups do not need to know. And this brings us to the next group, HACCP coordinators. Now, whether they work with a high, a medium, or a low-risk plant, the HACCP coordinator needs to know a lot more than the rest of the team. They need to understand everything we've talked about so far, and they also need to be able to draft a HACCP plan from scratch. They need to know how to facilitate a team, how to analyze data, how to identify and how to avoid common mistakes. Now, we could go on and on about what only auditors and other professionals need to know, but I think you get the picture. So we've looked at different groups of people and the specific competencies each one needs to have. Now, can you see how throwing a generic HACCP training at the entire group may be overwhelming to some or to most of them? Can you see how it's overkill? Now imagine instead planning your training ahead and giving each group the right content for their role. Everybody would know exactly what is expected of them, and they wouldn't be confused by an information overload, and that will have a much bigger impact on their performance. Because that's what happens when you set people up for success. They perform better.